really feeling, well, I guess I should read it. Me trying to ask someone for a favor. Hey, could you help me with this thing? Absolutely no pressure though. Totally okay if you can't. If you'd rather run me over with a car, that's cool. Are you mad at me? So it's totally irrelevant for me. It's like all this pressure. I'm like really want to be independent. Don't want to depend on anyone else, except I do really depend on them to like me and to not be upset with me. And which is probably some internalized sexism as well. So I don't know, there's a lot to discuss and explore with independence and interdependence. And, quickly, the medical model and the social model for disability. Essentially, the medical model just means that just looks at disability as a lack and a negative thing always, and something that needs to be cured or treated if possible. And the social model, so I'll read this part. The person is disabled by their environment and its physical communication and social barriers. So like this particular environment makes the person disabled, but in some other environment they wouldn't be. Disabled people are normal, valid varieties of human being and should have equal rights and access to society just as they are. Since the disabled person is inherently equal, they have a right to autonomy, choice, and free and informed consent in their own lives. This happens a lot. A lot of disability groups don't have anyone with disabilities on their committees and making decisions. Sometimes there's an assumption that they're not able to. Sometimes they just don't make any effort to get any of them on their committees. So, and that was what I was surrounded in most of Bodhi's life until recently, is just parents talking about this horrible tragedy that happened to them, and not anyone with disabilities or anyone seeing any positive in these situations. So I mostly read this book, which was mentioned this morning, Beasts of Burden, Sonara Taylor. Definitely a good book. Oh no, I've left it in my bag because I was going to pull that. I'll pull that out in a minute. But this is some of her artwork. She does a lot of artwork comparing herself to non-human animals, and she's very comfortable with that. Obviously, that's not going to be the case for everyone, but so she has lots of fantastic artwork to check out. And this I know you can't see very well, but these are disabled humans kind of in a cage like we would often see chickens. And she talks about the fact that plenty of non-human animals, especially ones that are domesticated, are also disabled. So, quote from her I wanted to read is, I feel animal in my embodiment, and this feeling is one of connection, not shame. Recognizing my animality has in fact been a way of claiming the dignity in the way my body and other non-normative and vulnerable bodies move, look, and experience the world around them. It is the claiming of my animalized, oh, I can't read the rest of my, sorry, I don't usually use PowerPoint, so anybody know how to see the rest of my notes on here? I'm sorry. Does it go down? Oh, there we go, thanks. It is a claiming of my animalized parts and movements, an assertion that my animality is integral to my humanity. It's an assertion that animality is integral to humanity. My husband and I will sometimes, only between us, nowhere else, we'll talk about Bodhi as being more like a cat, whereas other people are more like a dog, and we see issues with that comparison, of course, but sometimes we would think of that as far as how he socializes and things, and so those kinds of comparisons can be done well or not done well. But cool thing is, if you guys are snapping or doing this instead of clapping, that's really great for Bodhi as well as the dogs. And I don't know, I'm okay with that comparison. But another quote. So Ellen Samuels, a 19th century scholar, physicians and anthropologists of the time did not in fact distinguish between characteristics ascribed to race and those ascribed to physical and mental ability as we do today. She explains that they were not analogizing differences so much as actually merging them into a flexible category of mental immaturity and incapacity. So this is where one of the big ways that issues can come from comparing humans and non-human animals. Various populations have been identified as bestial, more animal than human, or as missing links of evolution. classifications that were inextricably entangled with definitions of inferiority, savagery, sexuality, dependency, ability or disability, physical and mental difference, and so forth. Samuel's statements is actually in reference to the racist anthropology that consigned Native Americans to the status of evolutionary throwbacks, examples of a less advanced stage in human development. Such assessments operated in tandem with claims that intellectually disabled people were examples of a prior stage in human evolution. Which brings me to, like, this story is just devastating to me. I don't know how many people know the story of Julia Pastrana, but she was one of the really popular sideshow acts in the 1800s, and so she was born. They describe her as having a very feminine figure, beautiful singing voice, all these feminine qualities and really, sexist ways that they would describe her. However, she had lots of hair on her face, and so the shape of her face and the hair, they had compared her most often to apes and sometimes to bears. And her manager also married her and exploited her whole life in these sideshows, and she died during childbirth, and he needed the show to keep going, so he had her and his new child embalmed, and for years and years until he died, he took their dead bodies to these different sideshows so he could continue making money off of the monkey woman. And what's really sickening is that this was still on display up until like 1972. So like over 100 years, her body was still like that until they finally buried her in the 1970s. And so it's just a really sickening combination of exploitation and oppression in all these different ways. So if we compare a human to a monkey, and people know this story, like, or something like it. I mean, she was indigenous, she was Mexican, she was a woman being oppressed, for money. It's all about making money off of her. It's just so many problems there. So we have to be a lot more sensitive when we're making those comparisons. So Taylor said, Pastrana's story reminds me just how much my ability and desire to celebrate my own animal comparisons is a sign of my whiteness and class privilege. People with disabilities have not been animalized equally or in the same way. For some people, animal comparisons are not simply insulting, they risk the loss of personhood. So, really important thing to consider when you're making those comparisons. So, quickly, she talks a lot about Peter Singer, and I'm sure most of us know Peter Singer because Animal Liberation, his book there's been a lot of editions, as you can see, and we quote him all the time, and he's in all the documentaries, and but disability rights activists mostly hate him, and we should all really understand why, and because they hate him and he's seen as so important in the animal rights movement, many of them do not want to join forces with animal rights because they think if you value this person, there's something really wrong here. So Taylor says that she absolutely loved this guy growing up and still values a lot of things about him, but it's important to know that he goes too far in his discussions and when he doesn't even need to, and it really marginalizes disabled people. This is an article he wrote, Should the Baby Live? The Problem of Handicapped Infants. And this is, he makes some cases for when infanticide is the best choice. A group who really protests him a lot is Not Dead Yet, and their concern is with assisted suicide, and this is one of those issues where I'm not necessarily there either, as far as is assisted suicide sometimes the more compassionate choice? When is it not? I haven't made all those decisions for myself, but people making those arguments are going to be really concerned seeing things like this, these generalizations. So what she describes is that Singer gets rid of that speciesist argument, like putting the line between humans and non-humans, but Singer instead changes it to persons and non-persons. So he includes apes as persons and some other non-human animals, but then the comatose or severely, as he calls it, like severely intellectually disabled, some of those people he considers non-persons. And so he'll say that, he'll advocate for apes living but not severely intellectually disabled humans. And regardless of where you feel on that, you can see why disability activists would be concerned. So I'm going to go really, I'm just going to skip these things. I was going to make some comparisons to a couple documentaries, but I'm running out of time. But basically, Singer just talks so much about is it better to kill a chicken or kill a human? Or what if the human's severely mentally or intellectually disabled, is it better to then kill them and not the chicken? And all these things, and it just reminded me of our typical vegan deserted island, and people always asking us what we're gonna do on that deserted island with that pig. Why have this? It's not worth discussing whether we're gonna kill a chicken or a human with all the other things and take the risk of really marginalizing and oppressing these people more. So yeah, that's the thing. Like, it'd be one thing if he was asked specifically about it, but he just on his own decides to go and make all these comparisons. So Taylor had an interesting conversation with Singer. Really fast. So Taylor asked him, do you think there are any possible positive effects disability can have on society and on individuals?